80% of the people I meet with don't know what they want. And I tell people, if you don't know what you want, nobody can help you get there. People don't seize their moments because when their moment comes, they don't know it's their moment. They don't know that the person sitting next to them is a key person to unlock where they want to be in 5 years.
Okay, so how do you raise $10 billion?
$1 at a time. In talking about how have I been successful with exits, I put myself in a position to leverage my strengths. Pillar 1, bring in the right leadership. Pillar 2 is create a culture where failure is okay.
I think there's a lot worse to leadership than there is like good leadership. And I'm a big believer that it all starts at the top. If you don't have that strong foundation, like it ain't gonna work, dude.
You have to be willing to fail. You just have to remember there is somebody out there that will like what you do. One thing I've found in my career is the more I know, the more I realize how little I know.
Man, this is like a masterclass on leadership. All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm really excited for today's episode. It's gonna be awesome. Today's guest, I actually met him earlier this year at a really cool family office event in the Caymans. And, we got to chatting a little bit and I was telling him about a book I was writing. And he was like, oh, I've written a few books. Actually, I'm a co-owner of a racing team. I was like, this guy's awesome. I got to look him up a little bit after. And then I found out, he's been on multiple businesses, CEO of multiple businesses, sold multiple businesses, raised over $10 billion, investor in multiple companies, obviously an author, investor, really awesome guy, family man. And I was just like, dude, I got to get him on the podcast. So I really appreciate Brendan Keegan. Thanks for joining the show, man.
Justin, thank you. And when I saw your title, Born to be Great, I was like, man, like that's everybody. We're all born to be great. It's just a matter of how we unlock that greatness. So thank you for being the host. It was great meeting you there. And I wish you continued success as you create your journey of writing that next book.
I appreciate it, Brendan. And yeah, no, I totally agree. Born to be Great. It was actually funny when we were coming up with a podcast name, we had all these awesome names and somehow this one wasn't taken. And we were like, we actually really love this name. It was our favorite name, but it took us like 2 weeks to get a name. And so I think we lucked out. So yeah, appreciate it. But dude, I want to get right into it, man. You've been a part of businesses, you've sold 6 companies. Like there's got to be a pattern there. When you go into a business or you start a business and you're creating leaders within a business, what goes on there? What systems do you implement? How do you create leaders within a business that allow you to sell it one day?
I'll tell you a little bit about what took me down that path. So actually, I'll back up. At an early age, I knew I wanted to be a CEO. Some people know they want to be a doctor. Some people know they want to be a fireman. Some people know they want to go into the military. I knew I wanted to be a CEO. And by the way, I had no CEOship in any of my lineage. I had no business leadership. My mom didn't work. My dad was a physicist, engineer, very introverted. So I didn't grow up around that. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And then through mentors along the way, one of my mentors, I went to him one day and I literally said to him, because he put me on the horrible project. And I said, Gary, what did I do to deserve this? It's like, I feel like I'm in the penalty box. He goes, why? I go, it's a crap show. It's horrible. It's a mess. He goes, yeah, but you're good at fixing stuff. So this is perfect for you. And little did I know that one conversation would change my entire career, because he gave me insight into my skill set as a leader that I didn't know. What he showed me is I would do better in my career if instead of going into this like great company and being a VP or senior VP and then a CEO, I'd do better going into really challenging situations and fixing them. But I didn't see that in myself. But then when I started to look at positions that the company had put me in, because I was in a very large company, 120,000 employees, you didn't get a lot of say in your career. You kind of got told this is your next job. And I had been in a series of internal turnarounds. And so that's what I looked for in companies that I went to be in as CEO. And I remember I called him. I got my first CEO offer. I was 29, just turning 30. And I said, hey, I told him all about it. He goes, great. That sounds like a good one. He goes, what are the cons? I go, they're going to be out of business in 3 to 6 months with cash unless they raise capital and turn some things around. And he goes, perfect. If it succeeds, it's all because of you. And if it fails, it's the previous guy's fault. So in talking about how have I been successful with exits, I have been very good at selecting companies on the way in that I could do a good job with. Like I would pick a company that I'd say, okay, where is it? Where has it been? What is the industry? Do I think I can take it from making 1% EBITDA to making 10? And so all 6 companies I've been in, 2 were turnarounds, 4 were transformations, and there's slight difference. I put myself in a position to leverage my strengths. And so the first thing I'd say to anybody, the key to a successful exit is, are you the right person and a good match for that particular company?
Hmm. And so when you came in, did you like when you're going to this business, obviously you knew yourself well enough, and I love that answer because mentors have played a huge role in my life as well. And it sounds like you had an awesome mentor who's like, hey, you're really good at this. You should go all in on this. And you're like, okay, let's do it. And I think that's the superpower nowadays because I think a lot of people don't really know what they're good at. I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time there. But when you're going into a business and say like you join the company now, like then what happens? Are you looking at the leadership team? Are you saying, all right, this guy needs to go, we need to hire this person? Like what happens next?
Interestingly enough, and I'm not doing this as a plug, but after my last turnaround, which was my most successful, and it kind of was most successful because I had the most experience going into it. It was my sixth one. I wound up for a lot of our clients and for private equity firms that were involved. We had 22 banks involved. A lot of them asked me to come talk about how we did it. Well, after doing that probably 10, 12 times, I go, you know what? I'm actually going to write a book on how do you transform and how do you have growth. So it was a book that I wrote, Dare to Disrupt, and I talked about the 8 pillars that you really need to have if you're trying to do a transformation. And pillar 1 is leadership. You have to have the right leadership in place. And what I espouse, if you're trying to do a transformation, is to have a 30-year leadership team from the company that has all the institutional knowledge. A third of your leadership team from competitors that may be strong, or competitors, in my case, competitors that were stronger than us. When we said, hey, here's how we do it, we could have somebody come in from a more successful company that said, that's great, but here's how we used to beat you, and here's how we do it. And then a third of your leadership team from outside the industry that said, hey, by the way, why do you do it that way at all? I come from the technology industry. We would have automated that. We never would have done it the way you do it. So that's pillar 1, bring in the right leadership. Pillar 2 is drive a culture and I say is predicated on my life motto, that has the courage to fail and the faith to succeed. You have to create a culture where failure is okay. Because if you're trying to transform, like we started 8 new businesses, 2 businesses failed wildly. But like if we had tried to make every business perfect, we wouldn't have found 8 businesses. We would have found 3 or 4, and we wouldn't have had the growth and the transformation. But it takes courage to say, hey, I'm going to go after this. I might fail. Like we aren't genetically coded to do that. We're genetically coded to, hey, I'm going to do this and I want to make it successful. Like you don't talk about failure on the way in. And then the third is people. You have to have the organization buy in. And by the way, when I say buy in, it's people that say, hey, that's not how we've done it previously, but we're going to do things differently. It's in the word that I use oftentimes is, if you do a good job on the first and second pillar, leadership and culture, you can become a magnet in your industry for attracting the best talent. And that's what we're able to do. Now, I can go through the next 5 pillars, but I'll stop here. And the reason is, if you don't get these 3 right, the other 5 don't matter. Like if the next one is IQ, you've got to build a good plan. You can have the best plan, but if you don't have the leadership, people, and culture in place, you won't get there. 15-second funny story. We had 22 banks in our group that helped fund us. We were about $3 billion. I got there, we were 500 million. 4 years later, we were 3 billion. And I threw a slide up that said, we're starting a new business selling patio furniture. And by the way, the company I was at was a fleet management company. And I talked about it for a couple seconds and I went to the next slide. And then I stopped and I said, guys, I was joking. We're not starting a patio furniture business. I threw that in to see if you're even paying attention. Kind of like a little fun joke and all that. And one of the bankers, senior bankers in the back of the room, and said, if you decided to sell patio furniture, you'd actually be really good at it. And what that talked to is, as a culture, when we decided this was our strategy, this was where we were going to go, we built such a resilient, strong, let's give it our best shot type of culture that we could do that. I know other companies that I have friends lead that I help them with, where I go, like, that's a great strategy, but your culture is not going to do it. Your culture is going to hold you back. Your organization is going to tell you all day long the 10 reasons why you can't do it. And then you're going to get frustrated. So long-winded answer, didn't mean to talk that long, but it's key is, leadership, culture, people.
No, I love that, and thank you, because I totally agree, because in my own experience in our company when we sold, it's pretty much a very similar story where, we wanted to go find the best talent, but they would only come work for you if, like, you were worthy of being worked for, and you develop that culture of like, "Hey, we can fail here. Like, we're okay with failure." My uncle would always tell me, he would say, "We can gamble in the business, but not on the business. So if we wanted to go start a little side project and it flops, like that's cool, but we're not going to go risk, everything for this, this whole we're not gonna go risk the whole business, but we'll gamble and we'll fail and we'll learn and we'll start new projects and we'll create new products and try to sell new customers, new stuff we've never done before." And like we were okay with that. So again, we were in the food and beverage manufacturing space, so our R&D team was always iterating, coming up with new stuff, and we'd market differently, and we'd, be really quick to fail, and we'd pride ourselves on, going to our customers and solving their problems. And if we failed, we learned, and then we moved on and got better from it. And I think what you said too about you could become a magnet. I actually have sort of a similar story in a way where we had someone in our R&D team who was like, "Dude, I've been waiting to work for you guys for like 10 years." And I was like, "Why?" I was like, "10 years, that's so long. Why didn't you reach out sooner?" And he was like, "You guys didn't have an opportunity for me." But hearing that was super cool, because we got known in our industry for being that kind of business, like where the culture is great. You can come here, you can grow. It's a lot more entrepreneurial. And I think, what you said earlier about helping your friends out, I think unfortunately too, and I'm not saying I'm the best leader or we did it the best, but I think there's a lot worse leadership than there is like good leadership. And I'm a big believer that it all starts at the top. And so like when I read your bio, when I met you, I was like, there's no coincidence that this guy was able to, sell that many companies, because he knows like it starts with the leadership team. It starts with the people. It starts with the culture. And so I think just like you're building a house, like it starts with that strong foundation. Like you said, if you don't have that strong foundation, like it ain't gonna work, dude.
Well, it's funny, like, on my very first day when I joined, January 1st, 2018, yeah, I joined Merchants, and they did this town hall, and they announced that I was coming in. I'm walking down the hall after the meeting, and 2 people in front of me are like, "Why'd we hire this guy? He doesn't even know how to spell fleet." Because I didn't come from fleet management. I was a tech services guy, and I scooted up as fast as I could. I walked past, I go, "I got no idea. Why'd we hire this guy?" And I motored past him, and by the way, it was a little joke I had about every 6 months, I'd check in with them and be like, "Hey, how am I doing?" And they're like, "Oh, that was the stupidest thing we ever said." My premise is you need to have leadership culture people, and it's good to have a few people on your leadership team that think asymmetrically, that come from an industry. Like, I came from tech, where if in tech, if you're not recreating your business every 3 to 5 years, you're obsolete, you're out of business. Well, in fleet, you didn't have to recreate your business even every decade. So I was used to change and automation and implementing technology and doing things that the industry wasn't used to. And like that was such a great like secret weapon. And so I say that in that as any of your listeners are thinking about, okay, the profile I have for our VP of technology or our VP of services or our senior VP or our COO is they have to have 20 years industry experience. I'd be like, hire the absolute best leader you can. They can adapt to your business. If you hire the best domain expert that isn't the best leader, they are not going to do as good a job as the best leader.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I probably had 2 or 3 people in my business career thus far who have been like, "Dang, like, this guy's really good." And they usually have come from big corporations like, FedEx, UPS, Ritz-Carlton, where like the culture is and, service is like P1 for them. And I've got to learn how they thought about things. And because they went from a big company to our smaller business, we have 85 employees. And it's like learn how they think about things, but then they would adopt our entrepreneurial, spirit in a way. And I think combining those, like you were saying, you came to an industry where like people aren't used to change, they're not used to innovation. We prided ourselves on being innovative. And I think when people looked at us in the industry, they would always ask, like, "How do you guys even do what you do?" And I think what you just said is such a like key unlock, because if you're not willing to, roll the dice a little bit and do something different, innovate. And I'm not even like the biggest fan of the word innovate, but just do things a little bit differently and fail fast and learn and grow. Like especially nowadays with AI and all these new technologies, it's a lot harder if you're not willing to do that. You're not willing to take the risk. So I think what you're hitting on is super key.
Agreed, 100%.
Okay, so how do you raise $10 billion?
$1 at a time. So yeah, so early in my career, I like I talked about the first CEO role I had. Right when I went in, I had to turn the P&L around, which believe it or not was not difficult, but I had to raise capital, and that was right after the tech boom in 99, 2000. that was very tough. So the first capital raise I did, I literally I was out in Silicon Valley. I was living in Los Altos Hills, just outside of San Jose and Palo Alto. I literally went and met with every single VC that I could track down. And eventually I found, 5 that backed us and did a Series C. So the first is you gotta be willing to go meet with a lot of people. And you have to be okay with 2/3 of those people telling you what they don't like about your business. And that's fine. Like, "Oh, we really like this, but, we wish, you were further into your investment thesis." And you're like, I'm not. I'm not. So you just but not to take that personally, not to take that as get in your car and be like, "Oh, I just got rejected." It's like, well, no, this company's in its 3rd year. They want to invest in a company in its 5th or 6th. Okay, we're not a good fit. But put that down and then be prepared to go back to them in 2 years. So the first thing I'd say is you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to be told 80 different reasons why you don't fit. And you just have to remember there is somebody out there and there's some buddies out there and there's firms out there that will like what you do. Now, as I went from VC and now it's VC, all my other companies have been private equity backed. And, I always prefer taking debt over equity because, debt you can repay. Equity, it's gone. In doing debt, is being creative. There's so many different ways to structure debt and getting to know the financial markets and banking and being okay with let's say you have an investment banker that's working with you, being okay saying, "Hey, can you slow down? Can you explain that to me? I don't understand that." And I think a lot of people don't say that and then say to them, "Okay, great. Could you go back and could you tell me every single option we would have in the debt capital markets?" And they come back and they show you 7 different options and you go, "Oh, tell me more about option 5. Like that looks like it might fit." But I think once you become CEO or senior leader, there's a little part of you that says, am I supposed to let the investment banker know that I don't really know what I'm doing?" And my answer to that is, no, you know how to run the business. You weren't an investment banker. You don't know the debt capital markets, just like they don't know supply chain. They don't know how to run a board meeting. They don't know how to run a sales pipeline. They know that. So, but I find a lot of people aren't willing to do that. And I view it as I actually think if you do it, you actually look smarter. I've never had a banker walk out of the room going, "This guy's really dumb. He doesn't understand all his debt." I actually think, in my opinion, I don't know. I think they walk out saying, "What a great opportunity. He's willing to look at anything." And I think you always wind up with a better solution. You always wind up with a better solution when you look at alternative options and you look at various options. But it starts with having humility. That's the point I was trying to drive to. You have to have the humility to say, "I don't know. Can you tell me?"
Yeah, that's why I read so many books because I feel like I don't know a whole lot. I'm just like I'm reading a book every week. I'm just trying to learn. And we sold our business to private equity twice, so I got to learn a little bit about how they structure deals in the debt markets. And it's just like you get the non-recourse debt and the mezz debt and all this kind of stuff, and they're just throwing all this stuff at you. I'm like, wait, like, can you guys repeat? Like, what does this actually mean? And I was very similar to you. I was just like, I don't know what y'all are talking about, but it is pretty crazy that once you dive into that, like how they're able to structure deals and like the amount of money and capital that can be. It blows my mind still.
Yes. Oh, well, I can remember times when they'd say, "Hey, we got this and this option." I'd be like, "Can you slow down? I don't know those acronyms." And you start looking them up. And then by the way, when you said earlier, you read books and everything, one thing I've found in my career is the more I know, the more I realize how little I know. Like when I was a programmer, coding away, writing code, I'm like, "Oh, I know a lot." But then when I became an account manager running operations, I'm like, "Oh, I don't know how to run a P&L." And then I figured that out. Then when I went into a sales role, I'm like, I got no idea how you actually go sell something. So it's like as I've gone through my career, what I've realized is I know like 10% of the equation, but when you're in one function, sometimes you think you know a lot until you now manage 2 functions and then you manage 3 functions. And then, if you're on a board or you're CEO, you're like, wait, I manage the whole company. You realize like, holy crap, like I know so little. And so,
Yes.
but having that humility to say, there's so little I do know, but I'm willing to learn HR. I'm willing to learn finance. I'm willing to learn legal. I'm willing to learn technology. And I think that's sometimes where some CEOs go wrong. They maybe came up in finance and they stick to finance. And they say to HR, hey, you run HR. I don't need to know it. I'd be like, yeah, you do. You do need to know HR. You should be in the meeting every year renewing your benefits so that you know, do we have the right benefits to be the magnet that people want to come to? But I see a number of CEOs stick to their strengths and they lose some of their intellectual curiosity to know all about their business.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. When I came into our family business, they were like, you're starting from the bottom and you're going to run every single function. I don't care what it is. You're just going to do it. And I did that for basically a year and a half from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. But it taught me so much. And then I wake up in a few years, I'm like, oh, I understand how this works. I understand how this works. I understand, a little bit more about manufacturing, supply chain, distribution, HR, logistics, like finance. I was just sitting in meetings being a sponge. And during that time, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose and I was just like, taking a bunch of notes and trying to learn as much as I could, but then you wake up in a few years and you're helping operate the thing and you're just like, "Oh, I actually understand a lot more now because I went through that." And I agree. I've seen even some of my friends who are in similar roles or CEOs of businesses or higher ups, they stick to their lane. And I'm like, dude, if you had the skill set to be more of like, I guess, a generalist in a sense, like you don't got to be an expert on everything, obviously, because that would be impossible. But if you can become more generalist and you understand like how things work enough to be dangerous, like you're just going to be that much better of an entrepreneur. And if you are in your business or you sell your company one day or you start another business, like you'll be able to crush even quicker and even better than you were before. And so I agree. And same here. Like I'm reading all these books, I'm writing a book, and I'm learning all this stuff. I'm like, dude, I know nothing. And I feel like I've come such a long way. And I feel like you climb that mountain, and there's another mountain to climb. It's like, oh gosh, I got to learn it again. But it's fun, and I
Yep.
think that's, part of the journey. And sometimes I feel like I had like imposter syndrome in a way where I'm like, do I actually know what I'm talking about, But yeah, it's been fun, man. I think business and entrepreneurship is like the best vehicle for personal development.
Oh,
And
yeah.
because it forces you to grow because of the challenges, because of the skill sets that you have to learn.
Agreed. 100. Yeah, absolutely. So
And,
true.
real quick, because I wanna go back to this, and I heard you say it earlier, talking about the people in your business. Would you ever go to maybe some of the frontline employees and, like, get ideas from them? Because in our company, I feel like they had some of the best ideas. Like, we think we'd be knowing everything and, we'll focus on these few projects, but then I go to someone who's, dealing more with the customer on the day to day, and, like, they have this genius idea. I'm like, "Well, why didn't you tell me sooner? Like, why haven't we been doing this 6 months ago?" Did you guys ever do any of that stuff kinda stuff?
Yeah, one thing I do whenever I go into a company is I spend the first month making as few decisions as I have to and listening as much as I can. So I'll give you an example. I was at this company, Worldwide Tech Services. We were a field services technician company. So every Dell server in North America, we warranted, we would fix, LCDs, gas station pumps, and all that. And we weren't doing enough service calls per day to be profitable. So we needed to increase our average technician 1.2 service calls per day. And when I met with the leadership team there my first week, everybody was telling me why we couldn't and how hard they were working. And when we went into overtime, we became less profitable. So I did technician roundtables, in my second and third week. I believe I did 6 of them. I think I did like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And what I learned is, they would get in their van in the morning and they would go to what they called Pluto pickup drop off location and wait for their parts to be delivered to fix whatever they were fixing that day. And I said, great, because they said, walk me through your day. And here's what I found out. They got in their van at 8. They drove to the pickup drop off and hung out for an hour and a half because generally the parts got there at 10. So here I am going, if we wanted to do 1.2 more service calls, what if we just started you at 9:30? And they're all like, that would be easy. If we started at 9:30, we would just drive, the parts would be there at 10, and then we would have, ready this, an hour and a half on the end of the day to do another service call. That just that little thing increased our calls per technician by point 0.8.
Wow.
And now I could sit there and take 2 different approaches. Approach A, how are my field managers not smart enough to figure this out and be upset? Or I can just sit there and say, guys, this is the value of bringing everybody in our company into the company strategy and letting everyone be a part of it. I talk about big eyes and little eyes, big eyes, innovations, little eyes, small innovations. And I would use like a capital letter I and a little, what is it? Not uppercase, lowercase I. I'd say, hey, the leadership team's job oftentimes is to come up with a few big eyes. We're going to go into a new market. We're going to go into Europe. We're going to start a new product line. But if you're really trying to grow a company, if you're really trying to transform, 100 little eyes will always outweigh one big eye. It just will. And the little eyes don't come from the leadership team. The little eyes come from your employees, your team members that see you doing inefficient things. But if we go back to the pillars and dare to disrupt, that's that third thing, culture and people. You have to have a culture that tells that person, at the second level, they've been there 3 years, speak up. Tell us how we can be more efficient. You're not going to be in trouble with your boss. We're rewarding, we're emulating, we're pushing for that. I will tell you that's easier said than done because you have to undo probably years of here's how the company runs or hierarchy or psychology. By the way, I've never taken a psychology course in my life, but after being a CEO for 25 years, I feel like I have my doctorate in it
I'm
because
sure you do.
because a lot of moving cultures forward is breaking psychology down to like, well, why don't our junior employees speak up? Well, they just don't have the experience. And I'd be like, I don't believe that. I think culturally, we're not allowing them to come forward. And you have to create that culture where the best idea wins, period. It doesn't matter where it comes from.
Man, this is like a masterclass on leadership. I love the big eyes, little eyes thing. I think we were doing a lot of that just without having that framework for it. But I love. I'm gonna steal that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
That one's awesome.
We then ran little I programs. We did innovation training to every employee in the company so we could help them think. And then we had these cards where fill out a little I card and we had a wall we put them up on. Employees loved getting it submitted. We said, hey, just because it's on the wall doesn't mean we're going to do it, but we're going to recognize you. And, we would have, it was right outside my office. We had hundreds of little I cards, but that's great. If you have hundreds and you implement 10 of them, 15 of them, you're going to make more money. You're going to grow your company faster. You're going to be more successful.
I think if you're a business owner and you just heard that, you should implement that and go read Brendan's book. Is that I really do love that. That's awesome. That is super cool. I wish we did. I wish we did. I'm doing that in my next business for sure.
There you go.
Okay, so I want to pivot a little bit. bFearless Ventures. So I was reading, how you want to help millions of people lead and live fearlessly. Can you tell us why you started that and what exactly it is?
I don't know when I came up with this. I roughly know. So I've always known leadership is what I wanted to be. I always knew being a CEO. I've got a very big service component. If I look at my vision, my values, I'm very into, service and giving back. But I built my purpose around, I want to build 1 million fearless leaders. And, on the back of my tombstone, I don't want it to say, 6 exits and 750% liquidity value. I want it to say, here lies somebody who built 1 million fearless leaders who then impacted, 10 million lives. In doing that, I realized that I didn't want to have a traditional career into my 60s and then go do that. So I retired 2 years ago. I have 2 kids. My youngest graduated high school. And I said, up until now, I've focused on one company, making one company great. And then I would write articles and I would speak and I wrote books kind of on the side, if you will. I wouldn't say it's a side hustle because I didn't do it for money. Any money that I got, I'd said, hey, just donate it to charity. I did it so that I could reach a broader audience. But I knew if I really want to get to 1 million, I can't be CEO of one company dedicating X number of hours to that. So, we sold merchants in 22. I retired in 24 when my son graduated high school. And then I started bFearless Ventures. Now, I had actually started it a little bit before. And what I do is I do 2 things. I bought into owning parts of 7 different companies, and then I do board advisory work. But then I spend more time now speaking, writing, mentoring. Like for instance, just today's, it's a Friday. I have 3 different meetings set up with a college senior, first year person who I met when they were in college that's in their first year that's struggling a little bit. And then somebody, about 30 years old, I'm guessing. that's wants a career transition, and I'm just mentoring them, spending time with them. So that's what that allows me to do. So I'm always looking for passion investments. I bought into a few racing teams. I bought into a country club. I bought into an electric scooter mobility company. I bought into, a few iconic buildings. So I've got to be passionate about it. I then do a few boards, for profit and nonprofit. I do both of those. But probably the biggest thing that I try to do is how do I wake up every day and build fearless leaders?
And that's awesome because I know a lot of successful entrepreneurs. I know you do as well, but I think the impact piece where it's, something bigger than yourself. You don't just want to be known for an entrepreneur. You want to be known for I'm making an impact. I'm actually making a dent on the universe, by the time I'm gone. I think that's super cool. And I want to be like those guys. Like I want to be more like you where it's like, how can I help other people? Because if I look to where I'm at now, like I think 98% of the reason, I'll give myself 2% of the credit because I just follow their advice. It's like I had awesome mentors in my life.
Yeah.
Like I can only imagine if like, I'm getting mentored by Brendan, he's helped me pick a career, like help me on my business. Like that conversation can change my life. And that's pretty much what happened for me. So I think that's super cool, man. I love what you're doing there.
Well, and tonight I'm having dinner with a 48-year-old guy. I've met with him a few times, and he said, "Hey, can I get some business advice from you tonight? I'll take you out to dinner." I said, "Great," but I texted him and said, "Just keep in mind, my business advice is going to go against everything you want to do because like we're just different people, and so I'll listen, but I don't know if I'll give you advice because we're just different." And his text back to me is, "That's why I want to learn from you because you have done things differently." And I'm 48 now, and it's time for me to find a different way to do things. And I say that in that sometimes people think mentoring is for your early career. No, mentoring is something we should all have right through, and I hate to say this, and I hope this isn't true. I hope this isn't true. But at some point, I'm going to be 75 or 80, and I'm probably going to need my kids mentoring me on technology. I hope I stay up on it, but the trend I see when someone's in their 70s, 80s, all of a sudden it's like, how do you work the remote? How do you work this phone? I hope I stay up on it so I don't need it. But odds are when I hit that age, I'm going to be like everybody else. And I'm going to need some reverse mentoring on how do I do this?
Is there a certain pattern or a question that you see pop up more with the people that you are mentoring? Like, is it a certain type of business question? Is it more of like a lifestyle thing or like feeling like, are they dealing with certain emotions that you see? Like, I'm curious there.
I would say 80% of the people I meet with don't know what they want. For instance, yesterday I mentored two college students that want to go into finance. Great. Tell me why. They both hit the canvas. I said, you want to go into finance because everybody says they want to go into finance. It pays a lot of money. You work really hard. You get to work in a cool city, but tell me why you want to. And they're like, oh, I just think it's fascinating. It's this. And I said, okay, what's the SOFR rate right now? What's the interest rate? What are interest rates? When's the next Fed meeting? Tell me three stocks, and you can see they're like this. And I go, I'm saying this, and that if you want finance, you would have known answers to all those questions. So many people don't know what they really want. Hence, they don't get what they really want. So it all starts with like, what do you really want? So around my 45th, 41st, 42nd birthday, I came up with the concept when my son graduates high school, I want to graduate life. So I said, game on. I got 14 years. He's in third. I got whatever grade he was in. He was he would have been in kindergarten. I got 14 years to figure out how do I have some financial freedom that I don't have to all of a sudden like move into a 1-bedroom apartment. How am I going to get there? And then, oh wow, I'm going to be a young guy. What am I going to do when I get there? So like you have to really think through what you want. So your question is, what question do I get asked the most often? It's not the question that I get asked, it's that the person doesn't know what they want.
Yeah, no, I see that a lot too.
And I tell people, if you don't know what you want, nobody can help you get there. Like if you get in your car and you drive somewhere and you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get anywhere. On the flip side, if you put into navigation, take me to Gillette Stadium where the Patriots play, you're going to get there. And, maybe you'll get a chance to watch an AFC championship game in that stadium next year, hopefully. But like so many people get in and think about it, they would never do this. They would never get in a car, not put their nav on, not have a destination and drive around. That sounds so stupid. But so many people kind of from a professional standpoint, that's what they do.
It's funny you say that because I actually think it's probably higher than 80%. Like if I had to like ballpark it with just like most people, probably 80% of the people you're dealing with because you're probably dealing with a lot of high performers as well. I remember I hired a coach probably a few years ago, and his whole thing is he has this like life blueprint design where he helps people figure out what they want and help them achieve that, right? And he's worked with, you know, some of the best athletes of all time. Alex Rodriguez is one of his first clients. He used to be a professional tennis player himself. He's working with a ton of pro athletes right now, top CEOs, and he's 86, I think, right now. And he said, never ever once has someone come to me and said, "Can you help me get what I want?" He's always had to help people figure out what they really want. And I've always been so curious because I'm like, that was my situation. Like, why have we never been taught how to figure out what we want? Is it just like you have to figure it out going through life? Like, is there exercises we can do when we're young? Like, how do you help your mentees, like, figure out what they want? 'Cause I'm sure you're prompting them with questions and stuff like, how do you help them get more clear?
What I tell them is you have to put the time in. It all starts with time. And this is a line that I use. The average person puts more time into planning their annual vacation. Where are we going to go? What hotel are we going to stay at? What's the cheapest flight? Are there water slides for the kids? This, they spend more time planning their annual vacation than they do their career. So, I'll talk to somebody like, okay, so let me take some of my best mentees. They actually have a list of what are 20 companies that someday I want to work for. So let's say you say, I want to work for company XYZ someday, and you're on the subway, you're at a vacation, you're at your annual vacation, and you sit down, and the person at the table next to you is working at that. All of a sudden you go, oh, wow. And you build a relationship. And then 5 years later, you wind up at that company because and okay, and I'll use this as an example. One thing that really irks my wife is when somebody says to her, "Oh, Brendan's so lucky. How'd he get into motorsports? He's so lucky." She's like, "He knew what he wanted. And when the moment came, I was able to seize that moment." People don't seize their moments because when their moment comes, they don't know it's their moment. They don't know that the person sitting next to them is a key person to unlock where they wanna be in 5 years. So, I became a sponsor of McLaren Racing. Great, I was just a sponsor. There's a lot of sponsors on that car. Well, over a couple of years, I got to know their leadership team, I got to know their CEO, and then when an opportunity came, their CEO owns another racing team, and I said, "I'd love to be partners with you someday," and that team, he goes, "Great, let's make it happen." But if I didn't know that I wanted that, I never would have asked. And truth be told, I wasn't the most qualified person to probably get that opportunity, but I was the one who asked because I knew what I wanted. It starts with you have to put in the reps. You gotta put in the time. And I said this at a keynote last week, you know, be more present in your life. And this is what I said to this group of bankers. In the appendix, footnote 17 does not matter. But they'll go spend 3 hours from 7 at night till 10 at night on that appendix, footnote 17, when I'm like, focus on being present and focusing on what matters.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's crazy, man. Like how many people don't really know what they want. I love your analogy earlier of like putting in the GPS. I sort of look at it very similarly as well. Where like a lot of people are driving cars, but they don't have any side mirrors or rear view mirrors. They have no mentors to help them. They got no GPS, and they're just going, and they might get lost. They get lost, and then they
Yeah.
just wake up one day and they're like, "Where am I?" And it's like, "Well, did you even like try to put it in your GPS or like look at your mirrors ever?" Like, and they're like, "No," and it's just like it's crazy to me, and, like but we're not taught even in school, man, like, I don't think I ever had one conversation, maybe from, like, a mentor who was a teacher, like, a rare individual, though, who was like, "How can I help you get to what you want?" And I was like, "I don't know." But it's not stuff we're, like, intentionally taught, I think in life, really. I don't know. I mean, at least from my generation, I would say 90+% of people probably don't know what they really want, maybe higher.
Let me go back to that finance example. It's okay if somebody says, I want to go into finance. I don't know what part of finance. It's like, I want to go to an NFL stadium. I don't know which one. That's fine. That at 21, that might be your answer, but make sure that like you do want to go into that profession and you say, why do you want to go into finance? I love watching when the interest rates go up and down, what happens to consumer demand. We're currently in a conflict with Iran, and that's driving gas prices, which is driving consumer confidence, which is driving interest rates. If somebody had said that, I'd say you're built for finance, man. Now, you might say, I don't know whether I want to go into retail or private wealth or investment banking or corporate banking or debt management or the back office of a finance or go into a corporation in their finance department. But the fact that you know what you like, that's like saying, okay, I'm going to land in New York. I'm going to land in New Jersey. I'm going to land in California. Then at that next phase in your career, you can say, do you know what I really like? I like the retail side of finance. Great. Then you go into retail. Then you say, I like consumer retail. Then you go into consumer retail. And then you get married and you have kids and you go, I don't like finance anymore. and you go, okay, what do you like? In those moments, those pivot moments are great as long as you pivot intentionally and not opportunistically. I'll talk to
Yes.
somebody and they're like, "Oh, Accenture just called and they offered me a job." And I'm like, "Great. What do you think?" "I think I'm gonna take it." "What do you think of consulting?" "I don't know, but it's a really good offer." And I'm like, "Okay." Like it's a good offer. Why are you taking it? That to me is opportunistic. Now, I'm not saying not to be opportunistic. I'm saying, does the opportunistic opportunity align with where you want to be in 5 years or in 10 years? Or are you gonna
Yeah.
get there in 2 years and be like, "What the hell did I do?"
Yeah. No, I always tell people like, what do you like to talk about on a Saturday night? Like you're just hanging out with your friends. Like, what do you naturally talk about? And I'm like, that's a big clue to like, maybe you should maybe work there because I'm a big believer too. Like, do what you love and the money will follow. Obviously, not everything about a business is, sunshine and rainbows. I don't love looking at P&L statements and, spending time in Excel, but like, it's just part of the game. But for the most part, I really enjoy what I get to do. And I think that's now, I wouldn't call myself like super successful, but I like what I get to do and I wake up every day excited. So that to me is a win. But speaking about excitement, because I know we got to wrap up here in a second, what's the coolest part of owning a racing team?
For me, the coolest thing is bringing guests right into the pits during a race. So, if when I can bring somebody behind the scenes and, my friends or my kids' friends or business colleagues, and I was just at this past weekend, we had the 12 hours of Sebring and we won, 1st and 2nd place. And, before
Nice.
that, we were at Daytona and we didn't win, but I brought a few friends and with the gentleman, he was Canadian. He goes, "Oh, one of the drivers is Canadian. That's so cool." Well, I knew when he was racing, and we do endurance racing, so there's 3 racers, and I knew when he was coming out, so I brought him down to the pit. The Canadian driver, Phil, gets out of the car. I introduce him, and he gets a picture, puts his arm around him. He goes, "I can't believe I got to talk to the Canadian driver during the race." Like, that's where I get my juice is, I obviously like winning. We won Daytona last year. We won Le Mans 2 years ago. We won Sebring this year. So all that's cool. But I love being able to take my passion for racing and bringing others into it. I love that.
No, that's super cool. I'm a big car guy, so no, I think that's awesome. I've done an F1, I guess, like, pit crew simulator, and that was really
Yeah.
cool, and I was like, "Dude, I can only imagine, like, being in the actual pits and, like, seeing them live." Because 'Cause I've been to a few races in my life, but, like, to be behind the pits is, like, it's sort of like I guess, like, a bucket list thing of mine, but, racing's awesome, man. I'm just a big car guy, so I think that's super cool, and, I love that answer. But, I guess as we wrap up here, I ask this to every guest on the show, just our last question here. The show's called Born to Be Great. We touched on it at the beginning, but what does being great mean to you, Brendan?
Being great to me means being balanced in your life. And I'll give this one last example. A mentor who I thought was the best person in the world. I wanted to be them. And I told him that one day essentially. And they said, "Don't be like me, be better." And I said, I'm never going to be as successful as you." And he goes, "Yes, you are. I had great business success, but my kids don't talk to me." And I was like, "Whoa." Like, I was like, "That's crazy land talk." What I'd say is be balanced, like, manage your success. Be successful with yourself, whatever that means, if for yourself it's being healthy, it's having friends. Be successful with your family, build relationships with your spouse, your partner, your kids, be successful with your friends. And by the way, sometimes I think being successful with your friends is the toughest because as you're being successful professionally and with your family, your friends get a little squeezed in there just for time. Be successful in your faith. be successful in the community, give back. Giving back at different seasons of your life. At one point in my life, all my giving back was volunteer hours. At later points in my life, I didn't have the hours, so I substituted it with dollars. And now I kind of have the luxury of doing both. And then being successful professionally. And I say that in that I believe in that so much. I've actually got a book coming out in August called Unbalanced on Purpose. And it talks about balancing 6 circles of connection: self, faith, family, friends, community, and professional, because I see too many people putting too much time into profession and not their family. And I see other people having these lofty goals for what they want in their career, but not putting enough time in professionally. So it's like, if they're your goals, you just have to make sure you're intentionally using your time on the planet that align with where you want to go.
Awesome, man. This is so fun. Where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Brendan P. Keegan on LinkedIn. I got a LinkedIn newsletter I put out every month, Fearless Leadership. That's one way. I got a website, Brendan P. Keegan. My contact information's there. Probably the one that is the most fun if you want to follow or hear little tidbits is on Instagram. My Instagram is at BPK Fearless, Brendan P. Keegan, BPK Fearless. I try to put something out every day. I probably wind up putting it out 5 days a week. And none of them are big rocket science things or like little quotes or little snippets. Like I'll actually take a couple of highlights from our podcast and over a couple months, put those out. That's the way to get in touch with me. I will say every person that reaches out to me, I do return a message to them. If you're trying to sell me IT services, SEO, or investing in your wholesale apartments or something, you'll probably get a note back that says, "Hey, it's not a fit." But if you're asking me, "Hey, do I have some time to help you?" You'll get it. You'll get an affirmative. I'll warn you, I will give you a short assignment to see that do you value it if you come back and you do the assignment. And the assignment's simple. It could be like, "Hey, tell me the 3 things that are holding you back." And by the way, ready for this? 80% of people I give that assignment to, I don't hear from again. So I kind
Wow.
of sit back and go, "Wow, you said you wanted help, but do you?" Hey, long-winded answer, didn't mean to, but that's how you get a hold of me. LinkedIn. The second one is Instagram. And then third is just my website.
Awesome, guys. Well, go follow Brendan. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks, Brendan.
All right. Thank you, Justin.